The Phantom of Halloween Night. It was a cold, clear Halloween night in State College, Pennsylvania. A thin fog clung to the streets as the air filled with the buzz of excitement. It was the kind of night where the veil between the living and the dead seemed thinner, where the line between reality and fantasy blurred as costumed figures roamed the campus town. Among them was Cindy Song, a bright-eyed, vivacious student at Penn State University, her laughter carrying through the night as she danced through the crowded streets dressed as a bunny. But no one knew that Cindy's joy on this night would be the last anyone would ever see of her. The town of State College was known for its college town charm, but the Halloween celebrations were always legendary. Students would pour out of their dorms and apartments in elaborate costumes, heading for the local bars, clubs, and house parties. That year, 2001, the atmosphere felt particularly electric. There was something in the air that made everyone a little more carefree, a little more reckless. Cindy and her friends were no exception. Dressed in a sleek bunny costume, complete with black fishnets, white fuzzy tail, and pink bunny ears, Cindy looked every bit the part of a fun-loving college student ready to embrace the night. Her friends, Stacy and Amanda, had opted for equally playful costumes, and the three of them giggled as they took photos together outside their apartment before heading to Players Nightclub, a popular local spot known for its wild Halloween parties. As they entered the club, the pulsating beat of music engulfed them. The dance floor was packed with students dressed as vampires, superheroes, and witches, all swaying and moving under the flashing strobe lights. Cindy was in her element. She danced with abandon, tossing her head back in laughter, losing herself in the music and the moment. It was a night to remember, or so it should have been. Chapter 1. A night that never ends. By the time the clock struck 2 a.m., the party was winding down. The club was beginning to clear out as students staggered back to their apartments and dorms, the remnants of their costumes trailing behind them. Cindy, Stacy, and Amanda decided it was time to head home as well. They stood outside the club for a few minutes, the cool October air refreshing after the heat of the dance floor. Cindy, ever the independent one, waved off her friends' offers to walk her home. Her apartment was just a short distance away, less than a 10-minute walk, and she had made the trip countless times before. Besides, she was confident in herself, and it was Halloween. The streets were still full of people, the night alive with activity. "Don't worry," she said, giving Stacy and Amanda a playful smile as she adjusted her bunny ears. "I'll text you when I'm home safe." Her friends watched her walk away, her silhouette illuminated by the streetlights as she headed in the direction of her apartment. They had no way of knowing that it would be the last time they'd ever see her. Chapter 2. The Silence. The next morning, Cindy's phone was silent. Stacy and Amanda both sent her texts, but there was no response. At first, they weren't too concerned. Maybe she had slept in after the late night, or maybe her phone had died. But as the hours ticked by and their calls went unanswered, a sense of unease began to settle in. By the time evening rolled around, they decided to go to Cindy's apartment to check on her. When they arrived, everything seemed normal at first glance. The door was locked, and there were no signs of anything out of the ordinary. They used the spare key that Cindy had given them and let themselves in. The apartment was eerily quiet. Cindy's belongings were neatly in place. Her backpack was on the floor by the door. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, and her clothes from the night before were draped over a chair. It was as though she had come home, started her usual nighttime routine, and then vanished into thin air. But there were unsettling details that didn't add up. Cindy's keys and purse were missing, but there was no sign of a struggle. And most disturbingly, her false eyelashes, something she was meticulous about removing, were left on the bathroom counter, suggesting she had begun to take off her makeup but hadn't finished. Stacy and Amanda exchanged worried glances. Something was wrong. They called the police. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. The State College Police Department quickly launched an investigation into Cindy Song's disappearance. But from the beginning, they were playing catch-up. The initial response was slow. After all, college students often went off the radar for a few days, especially after a party-filled weekend. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Cindy wasn't just taking a break. Investigators combed through her apartment, looking for any clues that might point to where she had gone. there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing aside from her purse and keys. Her cell phone, a crucial piece of evidence, had been left behind, but there were no recent messages or calls that provided any leads. Her friends and family were interviewed extensively. Cindy had been a responsible and reliable person, someone who wouldn't just disappear without a word. Her parents, who lived in South Korea, were devastated, unable to comprehend how their daughter could vanish from a seemingly safe college town in the middle of the night. In the weeks that followed, the police pursued several leads. They canvassed the area around Cindy's apartment, interviewing neighbors, bartenders, and anyone who might have seen her that night, but no one reported anything unusual. The streets had been filled with people in costume, and it was hard to tell if anyone had noticed Cindy specifically. The investigation seemed to stall almost as soon as it began, without any concrete evidence or eyewitnesses. Cindy's case quickly grew cold. Chapter 4. A City in Fear. As news of Cindy Song's disappearance spread, a sense of fear and unease gripped State College. It wasn't just the fact that a young woman had gone missing, it was the complete lack of answers. Cindy had vanished into thin air, and no one knew how or why. Rumors began to swirl around campus. Some believed that Cindy had been abducted by someone she knew, maybe an ex-boyfriend or a secret admirer who had been following her. Others whispered that she had been the victim of a random attack, possibly by a stranger who had been watching her that night. There were even those who speculated that Cindy had been taken by something more sinister, something supernatural. After all, it was Halloween night when she disappeared, the night when the boundary between the living and the dead is said to be at its thinnest. But while the rumors provided plenty of fodder for speculation, they did little to help the investigation. Days turned into weeks, and then into months. With no new leads, the case grew colder, and Cindy's name began to fade from the headlines. Chapter 5. Paul Weekland and a Twist of Fate. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a bizarre and unexpected twist shook the case wide open. In 2003, 2 years after Cindy's disappearance, a man named Paul Weekland came forward with a shocking confession. Weekland, a convicted criminal, claimed that Cindy had been kidnapped and murdered by a man named Hugo Selensky, a notorious drug dealer and career criminal from Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. According to Weekland, Selensky had abducted Cindy on the night she disappeared and taken her to his remote property, where he had held her captive before ultimately killing her. Weekland's story was chilling, but it seemed to fit the timeline of Cindy's disappearance. The police took the tip seriously. They had been investigating Selensky for other crimes, including the murders of several other individuals whose bodies had been found buried on his property. If Selensky had indeed been involved in Cindy's disappearance, it would explain why there had been no trace of her for so long. Investigators searched Selensky's property and uncovered a gruesome discovery: multiple sets of human remains buried in the backyard. However, none of the remains were identified as Cindy's. Still, Weekland's tip had reignited the investigation, and Selensky became the prime suspect in her case. But as the investigation continued, cracks began to appear in Weekland's story. He had a history of making false statements to law enforcement, and some of the details he provided didn't match up with the known facts of the case. Despite the renewed focus on Selensky, there was still no concrete evidence linking him to Cindy's disappearance. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Chapter 6. Theories and Suspects. Over the years, multiple theories emerged about what had happened to Cindy Song. Some believed that Selensky was indeed responsible, and that her body was simply buried in a location that had not yet been discovered. Others speculated that Cindy had been the victim of a random abduction, perhaps taken by someone who had spotted her walking home that night. One of the more compelling theories involved Cindy's ex-boyfriend, Jake. Though their relationship had ended amicably, there were whispers that Jake had never truly gotten over her. Some of Cindy's friends reported that Jake had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, and there were rumors that he had been seen near her apartment around the time she went missing. Jake, however, had an airtight alibi for the night Cindy vanished. He had been at a Halloween party across town, surrounded by dozens of witnesses who confirmed his presence. Despite the suspicion surrounding him, there was never enough evidence to implicate him in her disappearance. Another theory pointed to a serial killer who had been operating in the Pennsylvania area around the time Cindy went missing. Several young women had disappeared under similar circumstances in the months leading up to Cindy's disappearance. And some investigators believed there could be a connection. However, without any physical evidence linking the cases, this theory remained speculative at best. As the years passed, Cindy Song's case became one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in Pennsylvania history. Her friends and family continued to search for answers, refusing to give up hope. But as each lead dried up, it became increasingly clear that the truth about what had happened to Cindy that night might never be known. Chapter 7. The Cold Case File. In 2011, a decade after Cindy Song vanished, the State College Police Department reopened the case as part of a cold case initiative. Advances in forensic technology and the rise of social media had given investigators new tools to work with. And there was hope that a fresh look at the evidence might yield new clues. Detectives pored over the case files, re-interviewing witnesses and following up on old leads. They even turned to the public for help, releasing age-progressed images of what Cindy might look like today and appealing for any new information that might have come to light. Despite the renewed attention, however, no new evidence emerged. The case remained as elusive as ever. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Cindy Song. As the years passed, Cindy Song's disappearance became a haunting symbol of the unknown. It was a case that captured the imagination of the public, not just because of the tragedy of a young life cut short, but because of the sheer mystery surrounding it. Every year on Halloween, as the streets of State College once again filled with costumed revelers, Cindy's memory lingered in the air. Her friends and family continued to hold vigils, hoping that one day, someone would come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle. In the years since Cindy's disappearance, there have been countless theories, rumors, and false leads. Some believe that she was taken by a stranger, while others are convinced that someone close to her was involved. But despite the efforts of law enforcement, private investigators, and her loved ones, the truth has remained frustratingly out of reach. The disappearance of Cindy Song is a reminder of how easily someone can vanish, how fragile the boundary between safety and danger can be. In a world where answers are often elusive, her case serves as a chilling testament to the unknown. And as the years continue to pass, the question remains: will the truth about what happened to Cindy Song ever be uncovered? Or will her story remain one of the greatest mysteries of our time? Epilogue. To this day, the disappearance of Cindy Song remains unsolved. Her family, now scattered across the globe, still clings to the hope that one day they will find out what happened to their beloved daughter. And every Halloween, as the streets fill with costumes and revelers, the people of State College remember Cindy, a bright, kind, and free-spirited young woman whose life was taken too soon. Some mysteries may never be solved, but they are never forgotten.